John Miller was the kind of man who loved wide-open spaces. He had spent most of his life on his family ranch in Montana, surrounded by endless fields, rolling hills, and the steady rhythm of cows grazing in the sun. The ranch was more than just a job for him, it was a way of life. From the crack of dawn to the late evening, John's days were filled with hard work. He woke up early, fed the cattle, checked fences, and rode his horse across the property. To many, it might have seemed lonely, but John loved it. There was a peacefulness in the routine, a sense of purpose that only came from living close to the land. Yet, even a man who loved his life as much as John did could sometimes feel the weight of it. The ranch was beautiful, but it was also exhausting. Days blended together, and John began to feel a longing for something different, something quiet, something peaceful, that wasn't weighed down by responsibility. He wanted a place where he could escape, a small retreat to enjoy a few days away from the chores, the schedules, and the constant demands of running a ranch. One evening, after a long day riding through the pasture, John sat down with a cup of coffee and browsed the internet. He wasn't usually one for modern conveniences. Technology had never been his thing, but lately, he had been curious about cabins for sale. He wanted something small, something simple, maybe nestled in the forest or by a river, where he could spend a few weeks at a time, reading, fishing, and enjoying the quiet. He didn't need much, just a place that felt like an escape. As he scrolled through listings, his eyes landed on a small cabin tucked away in a remote area of the Montana wilderness. The photos showed a cozy, rustic structure surrounded by tall pine trees. A thin trail led up to it, and a small creek ran nearby. The cabin looked like something out of a storybook. Sunlight danced across the wooden walls, and smoke curled gently from the chimney. John leaned closer, studying every detail. The listing was brief, only a few sentences describing the cabin's features. But something about it called to him. He didn't think twice. The idea of buying a cabin sight unseen seemed risky, but John had spent his life taking chances. Riding a horse across unknown terrain, fixing fences in the middle of a storm, handling a stubborn cow, these were all things that required trust in one's instincts. And right now, his instinct told him that this cabin was meant to be his. He made the call the next day and spoke with the seller. After a brief conversation, a deal was made. John paid for the cabin and imagined the days he would soon spend there, free from the weight of ranch life. He packed lightly for the trip. He didn't need much, just a few changes of clothes, some fishing gear, a notebook, and his old camera. He wanted to document the quiet moments he imagined, the sunrise over the trees, the way the sunlight would filter through the branches, the sound of birds singing in the morning. The drive was long, and the road grew narrower and rockier as he approached the remote location. John felt a thrill he hadn't felt in years, a mix of excitement and curiosity about what awaited him. As he neared the cabin, John noticed the forest closing in around him. The air smelled fresh and clean, tinged with pine and earth. He could hear the faint sound of water, flowing somewhere nearby. The sunlight dappled the ground through the trees, creating shifting patterns that made him feel like he was entering another world. He parked his truck at the edge of a small clearing and stepped out. The silence was almost overwhelming. It was the kind of quiet that made you notice everything. The rustle of leaves, the chirping of crickets, the distant call of a bird. John took a deep breath and felt a sense of peace settle over him. The cabin came into view, just as it had appeared in the photos. It was small but sturdy, with a wooden porch that looked perfect for sitting with a mug of coffee in the morning. The windows were dusty, and the paint on the walls had faded slightly, but it only added to the charm. John walked slowly around the cabin, running his hand over the wooden railing, imagining himself sitting there, watching the sunset, letting the stress of the world slip away. He opened the door with a key he had received from the seller and stepped inside. The cabin smelled faintly of wood and earth. It was empty, just as he had expected. A small kitchen was tucked into one corner, and a living area with a stone fireplace dominated the rest of the room. John imagined building a fire there on cold evenings, reading a book, or simply staring into the flames. He explored every corner, feeling a growing sense of satisfaction. This was going to be his place, his sanctuary. After a while, John stepped outside again and walked along the narrow path leading to the creek he had seen in the photos. He listened to the water rushing over rocks and watched the sunlight glint off the surface. The scene was perfect, almost magical. He felt like he had stumbled upon a hidden piece of the world that few people ever got to see. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt completely free. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, John built a small fire outside. He roasted a simple meal and sat on a log, staring into the flames. He thought about how life could be unpredictable. One day, he was working on the ranch, thinking about nothing more than the next day's chores. The next day, he was sitting by a fire in a quiet forest, miles away from everything he knew. It was exhilarating and slightly terrifying at the same time. Night fell quickly in the forest, and the sky filled with stars. John had lived in Montana all his life, but the view from the cabin was unlike anything he had seen. The stars seemed closer, brighter, as if they were leaning down to touch the earth. He felt a strange mix of awe and solitude. Being alone in such a place was both peaceful and humbling. He realized that this cabin wasn't just a retreat, it was a chance to see life from a different perspective, to slow down and appreciate the small moments that often went unnoticed in the rush of daily life. As he settled into the cabin for the night, John couldn't help but feel a flicker of anticipation. He had no idea what the coming days would bring. But for the first time in a long while, he felt ready for anything. This small cabin, purchased on a whim, promised not just solitude and peace, but a new chapter in his life. One full of discovery, quiet joy, and perhaps unexpected surprises. Little did John know, the next morning would bring a discovery that would change everything he thought he knew about this quiet retreat. Something or someone was already living there, and their arrival would turn his peaceful getaway into an adventure he never could have imagined. But for now, John closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the fire and the calm of the forest, ready to face whatever awaited him at the cabin he had bought sight unseen. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall pine trees, casting golden patterns across the small clearing where John had parked his truck. Birds chirped cheerfully, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves. John woke early, feeling refreshed after a long night in the quiet forest. He stretched, took a deep breath of the crisp mountain air, and thought about the day ahead. He had planned to explore the nearby trails, fish in the creek, and enjoy the peacefulness of the cabin. Everything seemed perfect until he noticed something unusual. Smoke was curling gently from the chimney. At first, John thought it might be a neighbor, though he had expected none in this remote area. But as he looked closer, he saw light flickering in the cabin's windows. His heart began to race. How could that be? The cabin had been empty when he arrived. He was certain of it. The idea that someone else might be there was both surprising and unsettling. John approached slowly, his boots crunching softly on the gravel path. He wanted to be careful. The last thing he wanted was a confrontation. As he reached the porch, he noticed fresh footprints in the dirt leading up to the cabin. They weren't old. Someone had been there recently. His mind raced with possibilities. Perhaps the seller had forgotten to vacate the cabin, or maybe a neighbor had been using it for shelter. Either way, he knew he needed to find out who was inside. John knocked on the door firmly but politely. A few moments passed, and then the door creaked open. Standing there was a woman, no older than her early 30s, with long dark hair loosely tied back and eyes that were sharp yet curious. She looked startled, as if she hadn't expected anyone to knock. "Hello," John said cautiously. I bought this cabin. I wasn't expecting anyone here." The woman's eyes widened slightly, and she took a step back. "You bought it?" I didn't know it was sold," she replied, her voice calm but tinged with surprise. John blinked. trying to process what she had just said. Wait, you've been living here? Yes, she admitted. I've been here for months. I didn't know it was on the market. I thought, well, I thought it was abandoned. I didn't mean to intrude. John felt a mixture of emotions. Confusion, frustration, and a strange sense of fascination all collided inside him. He had expected an empty cabin, a quiet retreat to call his own. Instead, he had found a stranger living in the very place he had just purchased. But there was something about her, not just her presence, but the calm, self-reliant way she carried herself that caught his attention. I don't know what to say, John admitted. This is unexpected. I bought this cabin sight unseen. I didn't know anyone was living here. I guess we need to figure this out. The woman nodded, her expression softening slightly. I understand. I'm Emily. By the way, I've been careful to leave no trace and keep to myself. I didn't think anyone would come looking for it. I can leave, if that's what you want. John shook his head. No. I don't want to make things difficult. I need to understand how this happened. He paused, noticing the small, well-kept interior of the cabin. You've done a good job keeping it. It's cozy, very cozy. Emily smiled faintly. Thank you. I like it here. It's quiet, peaceful. I didn't mean to cause trouble. There was a brief, awkward silence. John realized that Emily wasn't just a random intruder. She was someone who had chosen this cabin as her home. She had adapted to the forest, made it her own, and lived in a way that most people could not. That realization made him pause. Perhaps this situation wasn't entirely negative. Perhaps it was an opportunity to learn, to understand something new. I guess we need to talk about the legal side of things, John said finally. I bought this cabin. I have the paperwork. But I also don't want to force you out if there's a way we can work this out. Emily nodded. I understand. I can be flexible. I don't want trouble either. I need a place to live. And I thought this cabin was empty. I can leave if it comes to that. But maybe there's another way. John studied her for a moment. She seemed genuine, resourceful, and independent. He realized that this wasn't just a simple problem. It was a delicate situation that required understanding and patience. Let's figure it out together, he said. No rushing, no anger. We'll see what works best. Over the next few hours, John and Emily sat down on the porch, the sunlight warming their faces. They talked about the cabin, the surrounding forest, and their lives. John learned that Emily had left the city to find peace and solitude. She had always felt overwhelmed by noise and crowds, and the forest offered the quiet she longed for. She had been living off the land, cooking simple meals, chopping wood for the fire, and even fishing in the creek. John was impressed by her independence and her ability to survive and thrive in the wilderness. In return, John shared stories about the ranch, his daily routines, and his love for the open plains. Emily listened intently, her eyes bright with curiosity. She asked questions about cattle, horses, and the skills required to maintain such a large property. John found himself enjoying the conversation more than he expected. Despite the unusual circumstances, there was an ease between them, a connection that was unexpected but welcome. As the day went on, John explored the cabin with Emily, noticing small improvements she had made. She had repaired the roof, built shelves, and even created a small garden near the creek. Her care and attention to detail were evident in every corner. John couldn't help but feel admiration for her dedication and hard work. By the time the sun began to set, the tension that had filled the morning had faded. They had moved from awkward strangers to two people who were beginning to understand and respect each other. John realized that this unexpected encounter might be the start of something meaningful, even if he didn't yet know what. As darkness fell, they built a fire outside, just as John had done the previous evening. The warmth of the flames and the quiet of the forest created a serene atmosphere. They shared a simple meal, laughing over small stories from their pasts. Emily talked about her time in the city, the challenges she faced, and why she had chosen this remote life. John shared tales of ranching mishaps, the stubborn animals he had dealt with, and the satisfaction of a hard day's work. There was a moment of silence as they watched the stars appear one by one. The night sky was clear and vast, stretching endlessly above them. John felt a sense of wonder. This place, this unexpected cabin, had brought him to a moment he could never have anticipated. And Emily, with her quiet strength and adventurous spirit, had changed the experience entirely. "I never expected to find someone here," John admitted, breaking the silence. "But I'm glad I did. You've made this place even more special." Emily smiled softly. "I'm glad too. I didn't want to intrude, but maybe it's not so bad having someone else here. Someone who respects the place." They sat by the fire, talking late into the night. Neither of them realized how quickly time passed. They shared stories, dreams, and even small fears. The forest around them seemed alive, yet comforting. A silent witness to the beginning of a new understanding. By the time they finally went inside the cabin to sleep, both John and Emily felt a strange sense of anticipation. What had started as a confusing and unexpected encounter had transformed into something promising. The cabin was no longer just a retreat for John. It had become a place of connection, curiosity, and possibility. As John lay in the small loft above the main room, he thought about the day. He had bought a cabin sight unseen and discovered a stranger living there. Yet he felt no anger, only intrigue and respect. There was something about Emily that drew him in: her confidence, her independence, and the quiet way she seemed to belong in this place. He didn't know what the future held, but he felt certain that this was just the beginning of a story far bigger than he had imagined. And so, in the quiet of the forest, with the fire still smoldering outside, John and Emily began a new chapter. It was a chapter filled with uncertainty, yes, but also with the possibility of friendship, trust, and perhaps something deeper. The cabin, once a symbol of solitude and escape, had become a bridge between two lives destined to intersect in the most unexpected way. The next morning, John woke to the soft light filtering through the cabin windows. The forest was alive with birdsong and the gentle rustle of leaves. He stretched and yawned, feeling a mix of excitement and curiosity. Last night had been unusual but surprisingly pleasant. He glanced at the small kitchen where Emily was already preparing breakfast. She moved with quiet confidence, arranging eggs and bread on a plate while humming softly. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air, mingling with the scent of the forest that seeped through the open window. John realized just how much Emily had adapted to this cabin. She wasn't just surviving here, she had made it a home. The shelves she had built, the small collection of herbs on the windowsill, and even the neat pile of firewood outside all spoke of her care and attention. It was a stark contrast to his own life on the ranch, where the land was vast but the details often went unnoticed. "Morning," John said, trying to sound casual as he poured himself a cup of coffee. "Morning," Emily replied with a small smile. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in a long time," John admitted. "There's something about this place. It's peaceful. Makes it easy to relax." Emily nodded. "I know what you mean. That's why I came here in the first place. It's quiet, private. You can hear yourself think." After breakfast, they sat outside on the porch, sipping their coffee and looking out over the forest. There was a comfortable silence between them, the kind that comes from being in a place that feels safe and removed from the noise of the world. John took the opportunity to ask about Emily's life, curious about what had brought her to this remote cabin. "I needed a change," she explained, her eyes tracing the lines of the trees. "The city was too much, too loud, too crowded. I wanted to be somewhere I could be myself, somewhere I could focus on simple things, cooking, reading, walking in the forest. I didn't think I would find a place like this, but I did, and it became my home. John nodded thoughtfully. He understood the desire to escape, even if his own life was tied to the land in a different way. I get that. Ranching keeps me busy. But sometimes I feel the same way. A quiet place, even for a few days, makes all the difference. They spent the morning walking along the creek that ran behind the cabin. John noticed how naturally Emily moved through the forest, stepping carefully over rocks and roots, pausing to examine a bird's nest or a wildflower. She pointed out edible plants, told him which berries were safe, and explained how she collected water from the creek without disturbing the ecosystem. John was impressed. Emily wasn't just surviving, she was thriving, living in harmony with the land. You really know your way around here, he said. I'd never manage like this on my own. Emily laughed softly. It takes time. You learn the patterns of nature. You pay attention to the signs. It's not hard once you get used to it. As they walked, they talked about the cabin itself. John mentioned some repairs that might be needed, like fixing a small leak in the roof and reinforcing the porch. Emily offered her help, suggesting ways to tackle the work efficiently. They began to plan together, discussing tools, materials, and schedules. John realized how valuable her insight could be. She had lived here, seen the small challenges, and adapted solutions on her own. Over the next few days, John and Emily worked side by side on the cabin. They repaired a broken window, cleaned the chimney, and organized the interior. John taught Emily some ranching skills, like how to handle heavy logs and carry water efficiently, while Emily showed John how to make simple repairs with minimal tools. The work was hard, but it was satisfying. Each task they completed brought a sense of accomplishment and strengthened their bond. During breaks, they shared stories about their lives. John told Emily about growing up on the ranch, the lessons he had learned from his father, and the challenges of maintaining such a large property. Emily shared her experiences from the city, her career, and the reasons she had chosen to live off-grid. They laughed at past mistakes, commiserated over difficult moments, and celebrated small victories. The more they talked, the more they realized how much they had in common despite their different backgrounds. One afternoon, while fixing a small fence near the edge of the forest, John stumbled on a loose board. Emily quickly moved to help him steady it. Their hands brushed, and for a moment, they paused, exchanging a look that held unspoken understanding. It was a quiet moment, but it spoke volumes. Both of them were beginning to feel a connection that went beyond friendship. There was trust, respect, and something deeper, something neither of them had expected to find in this remote cabin. As evening approached, they built a fire outside and prepared a simple meal. The golden light of the setting sun bathed the forest in warmth. They sat close to the fire, talking about their hopes for the future. John realized that he was beginning to see the cabin not just as a retreat, but as a place where life could change in unexpected ways. Emily felt the same, sensing that this encounter had shifted something inside her as well. One night, after a long day of work, they sat by the fire in silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The forest was alive with sounds, the whisper of leaves, the crackle of the fire, the distant call of an owl. John broke the silence. You know, he said quietly, I never expected buying this cabin to turn into, well, this. Meeting you, working together, talking like this. It's been surprising, but good, really good. Emily smiled, her eyes reflecting the firelight. I feel the same. I didn't expect anyone else to be here. But now, I'm glad you are. It feels easier, somehow. Not so lonely. The days turned into a rhythm. They worked on the cabin in the mornings, explored the forest in the afternoons, and sat by the fire at night. They laughed, shared stories, and helped each other in ways neither of them had anticipated. Trust grew naturally, as did a quiet sense of companionship. Both of them felt the beginning of something special, though they were careful not to rush it. The forest and the cabin had a way of slowing time, allowing feelings to grow gently and naturally. John began to notice the little things about Emily, the way she concentrated when repairing a shelf, the way she laughed at his jokes, the careful way she observed the forest. Emily noticed John's steady determination, his kindness, and the quiet way he listened to her thoughts and ideas. They complemented each other in ways neither had expected. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch after finishing repairs, John said, "I have to admit, I thought this cabin would just be a quiet place to get away. But now, it feels like it's meant to be something more. Maybe not in ways I expected, but more meaningful." Emily nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I know. I didn't expect anyone else to share this place with me. But now, it feels right. Comfortable, in a way I didn't think was possible." Their days continued in this rhythm, filled with work, exploration, and conversation. They learned from each other, supported each other, and began to imagine a future where the cabin was no longer just a place to escape, but a place to live fully, together. Each moment they spent together strengthened their connection, building a foundation of trust, respect, and understanding. By the time a full week had passed, John and Emily had transformed the cabin. Repairs were completed, the interior was organized, and the small garden Emily had started was flourishing. The forest outside seemed even more alive, welcoming them into its quiet embrace. They had grown comfortable in each other's presence, and a quiet sense of happiness settled over them both. One evening, as they sat by the fire, John realized how much he had come to appreciate Emily, not just for her skills or her resourcefulness, but for the person she was. Emily, in turn, saw in John someone who could share in her life, someone reliable, kind, and strong. They didn't need to say much. Their connection was evident in their actions, their shared laughter, and the ease with which they worked together. As night fell, the stars twinkled above, and the fire crackled softly. John felt a deep sense of gratitude. What had begun as a simple purchase buying a cabin sight unseen had led him to a remarkable experience, one that was richer and more meaningful than he could have imagined. Emily's presence had transformed the cabin into a true home, filled with warmth, trust, and the promise of something extraordinary. In the quiet of the forest, with the fire casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls, John and Emily realized that their unexpected meeting had become a turning point. The cabin was no longer just a retreat, it was a place of connection, growth, and the possibility of a shared future. They were learning to navigate life together, discovering that sometimes the most unexpected encounters could lead to the most meaningful experiences. And so, as they prepared for sleep that night, both John and Emily felt a sense of anticipation for what was to come. The cabin had brought them together, and the forest around them seemed to hold endless possibilities. In that quiet, simple life, they had found something rare: companionship, trust, and the gentle beginnings of a bond that neither of them had expected, but both had come to cherish. The days grew longer as autumn edged into the forest, and John and Emily settled into a new rhythm. What had started as an unexpected encounter had now become a shared life, where both of them contributed to the cabin and the land around it. The repairs were finished. The garden was thriving, and the cabin had taken on a warmth that reflected both of their personalities. It was no longer just John's retreat or Emily's hideaway. It was a home, built by two people learning to live together in harmony. They spent their mornings tending to small projects around the cabin. John would check the fences, cut wood for the fireplace, or clear trails along the creek, while Emily prepared breakfast, tended the garden, or experimented with preserving fruits and vegetables for the coming winter. Even when they worked separately, there was a quiet sense of connection. A glance across the porch, or a shared laugh while carrying a heavy log reminded them that they were partners in this new life, learning from each other and appreciating the skills they each brought to the table. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch with mugs of warm tea, John turned to Emily with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking," he said, "about how we're going to handle the cabin legally. I don't want to cause problems for you, and I also want to make sure everything is clear for both of us." Emily nodded, setting down her mug. "I was hoping we could find a solution together. I like being here, and I don't want to leave. But I also respect that it's your property. Maybe there's a way we can share it, or make an arrangement that works for both of us." They spent the next few days discussing options with care and patience. They explored possibilities like co-ownership, leasing, or even working out a trade where Emily could contribute to the upkeep in exchange for living there. They consulted with a local attorney to ensure everything was done properly. It was a process that required compromise, understanding, and open communication, but both John and Emily were willing to make it work. They had learned that partnership wasn't just about living together, it was about respecting each other, listening, and finding solutions that honored both sides. Finally, after several meetings and a lot of discussion, they reached an agreement. John would retain ownership of the cabin, but Emily would have the right to live there and continue to make it her home. They drew up a formal arrangement that was fair, clear, and respectful. Both of them felt a sense of relief and accomplishment. The agreement meant that they could continue building their lives together without fear of conflict or misunderstanding. It was a foundation for trust and stability, the kind of foundation that allowed deeper connections to grow. With the legal matters settled, they turned their focus to enjoying their time together. The forest was changing with the seasons, the leaves turning golden and red, the air crisp and refreshing. They hiked along trails that wound through the trees, discovered hidden waterfalls, and sat by the creek, skipping stones and sharing quiet conversations. The simple joys of life became extraordinary in their presence. A meal prepared together, a fire built at dusk, or even a shared silence on the porch became moments of connection and contentment. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John and Emily were sitting on the porch, wrapped in blankets. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink. The forest bathed in a soft glow. John looked at Emily, noticing the way the firelight highlighted her features, the way her eyes reflected both strength and gentleness. He realized just how much this cabin and the forest had changed him, not just by providing a retreat, but by bringing Emily into his life. "I never thought buying this cabin would lead to this," he said softly. Emily smiled, leaning back against the railing. "Neither did I. I thought I was coming here to be alone, to escape the world. But now, it feels like I found something I didn't know I was looking for." They shared a quiet moment, watching the stars begin to appear one by one. The night was clear, and the air was crisp, filled with the earthy scent of pine and soil. The fire crackled softly, a comforting companion to the gentle sounds of the forest. For the first time, both of them felt truly at home, not just in the cabin, but in the presence of each other. Over the following weeks, they continued to explore their shared life. John taught Emily more about ranching skills that could be adapted to their forest life, like handling heavier tools or understanding the patterns of wildlife in the area. Emily taught John practical survival techniques, how to preserve food, how to identify edible plants, and how to maintain the balance of nature while living off the land. Their skills complemented each other perfectly, creating a partnership that was both practical and deeply personal. Evenings were often spent around the fire, sharing stories and laughter. John would recount tales of the ranch, both humorous and challenging moments, while Emily shared anecdotes from her past, her life in the city, and her journey to the forest. They learned to appreciate each other's perspectives, discovering that their different experiences added depth and richness to their lives. The forest became a canvas on which they painted their new life, filled with collaboration, respect, and quiet joy. As winter approached, they worked together to prepare the cabin and the surrounding area. They gathered firewood, stocked supplies, and reinforced the structure against the cold. It was hard work, but it was satisfying. Every task they completed together strengthened their bond. They relied on each other, supported each other, and found joy in the small victories. The forest, once a place of solitude, had become a place of teamwork, trust, and shared dreams. One cold evening, after a long day of preparation, they sat inside the cabin, warmed by the fire and the sense of accomplishment. John looked around, noticing the changes they had made together, the repaired porch, the organized interior, the cozy touches that Emily had added. The cabin had transformed from a simple retreat into a true home. "You know," John said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I came here expecting solitude, I didn't think I'd find friendship, or anything more. But I feel like I've found both. Emily looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. I feel the same. I came here to escape, to be alone. But now, I can't imagine this place without you. We've made it something special together. There was a moment of quiet understanding between them, a recognition that their journey had led them to a connection that was rare and precious. The cabin had brought them together, and the forest had witnessed the growth of trust, respect, and affection. It was a bond that had formed naturally, without force, built on shared experiences and mutual support. As winter settled in, the forest transformed. Snow blanketed the ground, and the trees were frosted with ice. The creek slowed under the cold, and the nights were longer and quieter. John and Emily embraced the season together, finding joy in the simple pleasures, building fires, preparing warm meals, and sharing quiet evenings by the window. The cold outside made the warmth inside the cabin even more comforting, and the presence of each other made it a true home. They celebrated small milestones together, fixing a tricky section of the cabin roof, harvesting the last vegetables from the garden, or spotting wildlife along the creek. Each moment was filled with appreciation and a sense of partnership. The challenges of living in a remote area were no longer burdens. They were opportunities to learn, grow, and rely on each other. One evening, as they watched the sun set behind the snow-covered trees, John took Emily's hand. I know we didn't expect to meet like this, he said, but I feel like this cabin, this forest, everything, has brought us to the right place, together. Emily squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with emotion. I feel the same. I never imagined finding this. But now, I can't imagine life without you here. In that moment, they both understood that the cabin had been more than a purchase. It had been a doorway to connection, to trust, and to a life that neither of them had planned but both had come to cherish. What had started as solitude had grown into companionship, and what had begun as an unexpected encounter had blossomed into a shared journey, filled with joy, respect, and love. As the first snowflakes began to fall, John and Emily sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets, feeling the warmth of the cabin and the presence of each other. The forest outside was quiet and peaceful, and for the first time, both of them felt complete. The cabin, once just a retreat, had become a home, a place of growth, and a symbol of what life could offer when one was open to the unexpected. Together, they looked forward to the days ahead, knowing that no matter what challenges came, they would face them side by side. The cabin had given them more than shelter. It had given them a second chance at connection, trust, and a future built on shared experiences. And in that quiet forest, surrounded by trees, stars, and the gentle flow of the creek, John and Emily had discovered something truly remarkable, a life richer than they had ever imagined, filled with friendship, love, and the beauty of the unexpected.